So thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Before we get into like what fascia is and how it applies to sex, would you talk a little bit about why it is you do the work you do? Like what brought you
Yeah.
to this and
Yeah.
what's so
So,
powerful about it for you?
what brought me to this work was my own personal pain. I was 18 and I was living as a captor inside my body of severe health issues and physical pain. And I was a young, fit dancer. I didn't look like the typical person, and people couldn't figure me out. I went to all of these professionals that were kind of, west and east. And it was a very confusing thing because all my symptoms felt very related to me, but, each specialist didn't understand what was going on. And I had had one kind of a additional workshop. I was certified as a Pilates instructor, a yoga instructor. I had like a big, a pretty good education in physiology and anatomy. And I still couldn't kind of figure it out on my own. And one day I was like, this can't be muscles. This can't be bones. And I was like, is there something else? Could there be like something? So I remember taking a workshop on emotional trauma in the tissues as a Pilates student by a rolfer, and she talked about fascia. And so I think it was kind of probably a divining moment where it was
Mm.
like, is it fascia? And then I was like, but what is fascia? I don't even know what fascia is really. So I just kind of did this deep dive for 25 years, trying to figure out first how to deal with it. Where did it come from? Why was it there? How it was affecting all of my other, interconnected symptoms, which were very diverse from digestive to respiratory to musculoskeletal. And I just wanted to be free in my body. And I felt so restricted both by physical pain, but also inside my tissues were
Mm.
extremely up, despite stretching all the time because I was a dancer or whatever. So that's kind of what led me there, is this deep hunger to heal. I
Mm.
wanted to heal my life and my body and understand. And I think I was looking also for a therapeutic approach that had permanent solutions. I didn't want to have to go and get body work once a week to stay out of pain. I didn't want to have to go and have acupuncture once a week. They're all good, but that's a dependency. And I was like, I should at 18, at 25, all through the journey. I was like, I just want to be able to live without having this thing crippling me. And so it drove me to develop the work that I do, that is really kind of a new science related to connective tissue, because what I found is that a lot of my things that I was doing in dance and movement and lifestyle was actually attributing and contributing to my symptoms. And so I had to kind of figure out, what do I need to do differently? How can I, you know, um, embody my life differently so that I can be free?
Okay.
Um,
So you found out what is fascia and
yes, I found
what
out
does
one.
it have to so let us know, do tell. And
Thank
what role does it play in our well-being? Like how
Such a
does it work? What does it, you know?
So the term fascia refers to special types of tissue in the human body. What makes it's kind of akin to being like a generic, like your clothing is made out of cotton. It's a fabric type woven fiber and fluid material that is involved in all levels of your physiology. And so when we get outside of the tissue, I use these terms interchangeably, but fascia in its greatest comprehension is actually a full body system. It's called the connective tissue system, and it's going in and it creates an entire system like your digestive system with its own organs, the way that it layers and moves around and organizes all of your body. It's like responsible as a sensory organ. It functions as a movement system, as a communication system. Um, it's pretty much, there's not a place inside your body that this tissue doesn't exist and show up as different types of tissue. So like the way that you have a heart as part of the cardiovascular system, or the lungs, fascia organs and organizes around all of your other body systems. So there's a way fascia shows up as part of your digestive system, as a part of your muscular skeletal system, like myofascia. And so it's kind of this entire comprehensive system. And in its greatest capacity, it's kind of the organ of consciousness of your body, the way that your brain is the organ of consciousness of your mind. And they seamlessly work together, creating this beautiful harmonics of communication and kind of consciousness of who you are as you live in this this time. So I think the easiest way to understand it for the listener is if you were trying to picture it, it's like if you could go in and peer inside your skin, you would see this delicate kind of spider web type tissues that looks like it's gel. It's very hydrated and water. It's actually 70% water and only 30% fiber, which is made from collagen and elastin and other cells, fibroblasts. And so this delicate tissue kind of organizes a mesh network that extends everywhere inside of your body. And this is really what carries the energetics of your entire body system, like the smart grid on the planet that takes and modulates high energy usage, like high voltage energy from outside the body, and low frequency energy of the physiology, like when your heart puts off its EKG. Fascia is behind the scenes modulating all of these different inputs and outputs and making sure that the body runs effectively and efficiently. So from that perspective, it literally is this holistic organ or body system that's involved in all of your, from body to consciousness of your mind, in how you live in the health and wellness of your existence. It's pretty extensive.
So why do you think nobody, or not nobody, but most people don't talk about this? Maybe haven't even heard about this. Like it,
Why is it so foreign?
yeah, like why is it just so like invisible, but not just like inside of us, but because nobody's really dealing with this.
You know, I think it's a condition of the human experience to always go with what's bright and shiny, what's obvious, right? Things that capture our attention. And for millennia, we've been dissecting, you know, ever since Da Vinci was like dissecting and really like drawn to these huge massed organs. What could this be? And this is amazing. And this is, and everything else was just superfluous tissue. Like they would
Yeah, move
actually,
that out of the way till we can
I
get
want to
to the
get to the
heart.
good
Yeah.
stuff. And finally, I think recently, it was been in the last 15 years for sure, scientists are starting to take a deeper approach because they're like, wait a second, there's a lot of this stuff and it's everywhere. There must be something that it's actually doing. And so I think that some of it was missed because we love deep and shiny. I think some of it is a medical community is really looking for like our diagnostic medical system is like, let's close the aperture and really be specialized. And fascia is really, because it's everywhere, generalized. That's why my digestive system was completely healed by me working on my lungs, right? And you go, those things aren't really related. And yet through the connective tissue system, they are.
Hmm.
And so it's a different model. And I think slowly our brains are catching up to like how things are connected, right? Like we don't like globalization. It kind of is weird. It's like I'm a state, I'm a country, and we do the same thing, compartmentalize our lives and stuff. And so I think some of it is social, how we relate to things and how we're raised. And some of it's medical and the traditions of
Yeah.
how we viewed the body, right? And how we've approached medicine to be, I've got to find an answer to this one thing rather than like, maybe there's all this, you know, interconnection,
Yeah.
and we're integrated people, not isolated
Yeah.
events. So I think that's why.
So what does it take for your fascia, that's the system to be healthy and functioning, and what kind of problems arise?
Right.
How do they arise? Like what causes it to start to be something we have to kind of work on?
That's really great. So if you could picture fascia as like this netting, right? Because it's 70% water, it means that we're more fluid than we are solid. And so anything that is in a state of not what is more of a pathology, meaning when a fluid system becomes dehydrated and dry and brittle, you have pathology and dysfunction. And so when fascia has fibrosis, is rigid, has ossification, which is like more bone-like structures, when it loses its hydration and cannot glide, it becomes sick and it shuts down and it becomes systemic because one area, it's almost like cancerous in terms of how that spreads through the entire connective tissue system. The way that you could kind of picture healthy fascia would be like a warm bowl of buttery noodles, and they pick up and they separate and they can be pulled and they glide easily and there's lubrication, and they use that consistency to spread mechanical and hard physiological chemical loads through the body and share it so that it's not so potent in each system. Unhealthy fascia might be like the brittle ramen noodles before water gets poured on it. And it's like crispy and they're like rigid and you crack it and it doesn't pull apart. And then you step in and you're like, what is the greatest influencer of our movement? I mean, of fascia is our movement. There's nutritional aspects for sure, bad diet, and it's like a holistic approach. But one of the greatest influencers of our fascia is movement.
Hmm.
And movement is like adding hot water to the ramen, where first it softens it, then it separates it, and then it allows it to pull in what we call in GST fascial animation, which is not just a stretching like a rubber band, but is actually undulating and distributing and almost has like a current like flow. And so what starts the process of rigidity in your tissues is a process called glycation. It's deeply influenced. Glycation is like a sugar buildup, a molecular sugar buildup that starts, it happens naturally occurring in the body. And it starts usually around the age of 15. And we slowly get stiffer as we age. It's part of, aging process, but it's actually accelerated and exaggerated by sedentary experience. So you almost want to think about glycation as like the way honey, after it's stored for a while, gets those crystals. And if you have a few crystals in there, if you get a little bit of fibrosis in your tissues, you just get up and move and you stir back in the honey and it becomes chewy and yummy and pulley. But if you let it sit there too long, the whole honey will become crystallized and it loses its ability to actually no stirring amount will do it. And so we really look at like, what are these contributor lifestyle effects that enhance the process of glycation in the tissues? And that can be from a lot of different things. I focus on it from movement. So sitting is really the new smoking for fascia. It's very bad for the body. Not all exercise actually targets fascia. Our approach to fascia is our fitness actually usually does more damage to the fascia than it actually helps it. And, but you can, it comes in with like our diet, oxidative stress, emotional and toxic chemical adrenalized tissue can also contribute to glycation. So the idea is that fascia teaches a lot of also deep wisdom about what it takes to be vital and alive. And one of its primary rules is moderation. It's not too much, not too little, right down the middle.
Right.
Just having the right amount of tension, the right amount of movement, the right amount of nutritional elements. And so it's kind of a call as a discipline and as a practice of health and wellness to be able to use fascia to get the right amount of tension in our lives. And that's kind of what draws me actually to the fascia work, is that I work with people's bodies in pain, but really we kind of share a similar thing, that it's also a brain thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So as soon as you go into the tissues, you're entering into the wholeness of a person. And sorry, go ahead. You have a question.
Well, I was going to say, it seems a little bit like the canary in the coal mine, a little bit. Like if we can keep our fascia happy, we must be doing an overall good job on our
That's right.
health and well-being, right?
That's right. That's right. And it creates mental stability. It creates emotional stability. And we could go into that a little bit about how the system is connected to the brain through, body somatic experience, and that it's as a sensory communication system, it's really on and listening to all of our experiences. It has 7 times as many sensors as any other body tissue. And so truly collecting our experiences, whether that's through taste, light, sound, pressure, like influence. And fascia is really biologically active in terms of how it responds to both our mental loads, our psychological loads, which produces chemical responses in the body, and our mechanical loads, which respond, they're the opposite. They're the same relationship and opposite, right? So I throw my hands up in the air on a victorious run and I won the race because my chemicals elicit an excitement and a victorious thing. But they're showing that if I throw my arms up in the air, I can also create that feeling of empowerment by doing the physical thing too. And fascia stands beautifully in this, it is fascia that's like causing this interaction. So we look at it and we're like, yeah, if I have an emotional experience, it's going to rest in my tissues. It's going to call contracture into my tissues and creates an imprint. And as I'm healing, if I want to free that, I also have to go into the tissues and help restore that function in that area.
Yeah.
Response. So
you're talking so much about movement, and it makes me wonder, and exercise, and not all of it's helpful. Makes me wonder if some of the ancient movement practices, yoga or Tai Chi, were those tuned into what fascia needed all along, and some of our more modern stuff is oblivious?
I think so. I think so. What there's a lot of there's this this is Dr. Helen Levine is one of this researchers who actually was researching the relationship between acupuncture and fascia. And they were showing that there's a 80% correlation between what we've charted as fascial lines and meridians.
Mm,
I call them fascial currents, but similar, right? And so
yeah.
they share similar lines. And I think old things like qigong and stuff were really tuning into the more subtle things. There was a different reason behind that movement, and it was to stir like more subtle physiology on all different levels.
Yeah.
I think that's really different than modern fitness, which really has two goals, right? Cardiovascular health and tone and strengthen to avoid osteoporosis or get nice abs or, be bulky and have cut arms.
Right.
It's like one is a really embodied experience and one is a really disembodied experience. But then it comes down to really like Tai Chi is about movement internally and energetics, but we also still need to have these like bigger, like fascia responds to wide ranges of motion, having load at greater stretches. And so we have to include some of those. And yoga, I think, is a different approach. I studied yoga, and I think that the point of yoga wasn't really movement. We've taken it and made it, but it was a
Mm,
spiritual discipline first. And most of the disciplines were to make discomfort, to challenge your mind to be able to center. And
ah,
so you do these really uncomfortable things, and then you'd hold that pose and train your brain to go into deeper levels of, not hypnosis, but like
yeah.
meditation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Mindfulness. Yeah.
it's become a fitness thing. And when you look at yoga from a does it access fascia, you can get some fascial stretches, but yoga is very posed. Okay, yoga is very positional,
Yeah.
and fascia is not.
Right.
Fascia loves spiraling and swinging, and it needs all these really big dynamics because it's water. So when you look at fascia from a different substance, a different science needs to be applied. And this is what we're kind of missing, is that fascia as a fluid falls under the physics when it comes to motion. Motion is physics. It falls under a different science called fluid dynamics rather than solid mechanics.
Right.
Solid mechanics are levers and pulleys and, kind of,
Yeah.
okay. And so if you look at hydraulics, it's like a syringe. The most simple example is like a syringe that pulls water into a tube, a cylinder, and then pushes it out. And if you look at anatomy, our body, because if we organize towards fascia's worldview, body view, you've got fascia in tubes. We're tubes, not sticks. And all of our mechanical movements are designed to compress the tube and pull our tubes and compress and pull. And it's pushing life and pulling life through us rather than pulling on muscles and shortening and tightening. And so that change means that these different movement systems need to start like adapting their principles, poses to meet those requirements in order to be able to really be super beneficial to fascia. But
Yeah.
you always can, I think what Tai Chi and Qigong are really doing is trying to take that energy and then bring it out and layer it. And that's really important to have this, it's called core distal connectivity from what happens on the inside of the tissue is congruent and sequential to what we see in our movement. And that is not what's happening. It doesn't happen on that's kind of what creates fracture in our personalities or in our traumas, right? Is compartmentalized on the inside, and then we have fractures and can't be who we are on the outside. And it's very poetic because they're analogous, is all I
Yeah.
want to say.
Yeah. There's a symmetry there.
Metaphor. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about what in the world this has to do with sex. So,
It's my
right.
favorite.
Right.
This is
Let's
what I
bring
think
it
of
around.
life.
Let's bring it around to that. What
Yeah.
does fascia have to do with our sexual functioning,
Yeah.
pleasure,
Okay. There's two ways that we really talk about this in terms of how fascia is involved. And one is, I'm going to back up and give a little new tidbit. Fascia takes its structure and its like ability to function from what's called biotensegrity. It's an architectural way that structures hold form by tension. A way for someone to think about that is like a pop-up tent, right? It's not built on like pylons and cement bricks laying on top of each other. It's built by strings pulling at different points and creating buoyancy and lift. This is found all the way into the cellular structures of our being, all into the structures of fascia. Most of our structural integrity inside of our body, the tensegrity, is created by equal and balanced tensions. Therefore, most of the pathology that we experience is caused by a lack of tensegrity, over tight, under tight, over loose, too much this. And this really comes into pelvic floor health, into vaginal like structuring, into, okay. Then the second way that fascia is involved is that it's a sensory organ. It is these thin, delicate tissues that line all of your muscles, all of your organs, different types of fascia. So around the vital organs, around your vagina, your uterus that has to stretch and stuff, there's a different type of fascia than in the muscular skeletal system. And yet these two fascias communicate, they're all online together. And so it's sensing and feeling and holding structure. So for example, from one perspective, someone could be experiencing a lot of pain in sex because of the structural component, right? Now I'm coming at it from physical. We kind of talked about this in the beginning.
Yeah.
That someone said yesterday, I think that the brain is the organ of sex or something.
Well,
It's a sexual.
it's the biggest sex organ. Yeah.
That's right. The biggest sex organ. I love that. And so in that way, we talk about it from just the physical structures, that if you have a short vagina, but you have a prolapse and a weak pelvic floor, you've actually dropped the uterus and made the distance of the cervix to the opening of your vagina shorter. If you have sex with a man and you're not fully aroused, or if you have someone who's too large for you, you're going to experience the pain that is caused by lack of structural tensegrity. That's the same reason we have like bladder continence issues. It's, and the diaphragm, or sorry, the pelvic floor acts like a diaphragm. It reflects what's happening also in the thoracic diaphragm, creating internal barometric pressure between the cavities inside the torso. So when your diaphragm up here is tight, your pelvic floor is out of sync, right? If you have torsion in your hips, your pelvic floor is not keeping its prop, its canopy, and keeping the organs in the right place. So that would be like a structural thing. But then if you have tissue damage, if you have, and this comes down to how sensors work and the receptors are taking in information, there's this interesting, actually, I should probably say there's a third one. We'll go over that. But there's this, you have sensors for every type of stimulation, right? You have chemoreceptors, you have light receptors, you have mechanoreceptors, which is pressure, you have heat, thermal. You have a type of open-end receptor that is called a nociceptor, and it's there to actually receive when there's toxic information of any kind. It's open-ended, meaning if you have too much pressure, it's activated. If you have too much chemical influence, it's activated to tell you that something's wrong in this area. And pain is a complicated thing. It's not at all fully solved, but what fascia brings to the picture, which is where I kind of started my journey, is it's deeply wired and related to our nervous system with pressure. And I think, and research is starting to show that it's coming in with this nociceptor. They've shown that if you have trauma to tissue and you don't actually reconcile it, and the longer it's prolonged, normal receptors like a mechanoreceptor that feels good with pressure during sex sometimes will actually switch off and become a nociceptor and will report toxic pain in a certain area. And so from the physiological side, we need to make sure that the tissues stay healthy, have the right tensegrity, have the right hydration, the right glide, the right fiber structures, that there's not overly tight, things like that. The third way that I was just going to mention that fascia is related to our, sexual health is, and I'm going to speak on this, it's a little bit on the frontier of what people are researching now, but all of these receptors, all of these, proprioceptive feeds that we get through our fascia goes to an area of the brain that's called your insula. And the insula, what's really interesting to me is that the insula is just now starting to be studied in the same way that fascia is just now starting to be studied. They didn't know what it was really about. They knew it was there. They just didn't understand what its processes were. And there's new research that's showing that the fascia directly feeds information into the insula of the brain, where we start to create our associations, where our proprioceptions take on meaning. So it's like, I can taste the wine, I can smell the wine, I have all of this like feeling of this experience, but that's just data. It's not covered in, I remember the last time I had my wine was with my mother before she died in Tuscany. I love the smell of this wine because it makes me feel close to her. That experience is wired deeply with our fascia. And this
Hmm.
is where the somatics start to kind of come in with how we start to heal these areas. So I imagine, I have not found the research, nor have I really gone digging. People might be able to find more of this, is that it's my feeling that that's where some of this connection is between our sexual health and our psychological health.
Mm-hmm.
We will have contractures and, experiences in our brain that then subsequently go down and create rigidity in our tissues, which then lead to the pain. And so I think in both ways, fascia is asking that we continue to loosen and open and let go and create more space for more change. And I think that an important thing that fascia teaches us, from sexual health or not, is pain is not injurious. Pain is not a problem. Pain is not actually toxic. Pain is just neutral. It is communication. It is information that your body is trying to tell you, feel this, then try to move it. And if you move it, then you will start to find that your burdens lighten, that your tissues open, that the pain lightens, and then you have access in. And that's when you can really start to deal with and free yourself from those things that you have contractures around.
Yeah. So we got the pain on one end of the spectrum. We've got pleasure on the other.
That's right.
I
That's right.
fascial health has something to do with our ability to
Oh,
maximize pleasure,
our
right?
pleasure.
Blood flow,
Yeah. Yeah.
flexibility. Yeah.
Yeah. Blood flow for sure. Flexibility for sure. Like, for example, an overcontracted pelvic floor actually takes away pressure that you actually want to be able to experience. It can actually change access of the penetration to the surface of your vagina that can produce an orgasm. If you have torque, because it's all connected, almost picture it like a piece of fabric. If I twist here, pretty soon the bottom of my shirt starts to lift.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I retract my pelvic floor and I'm trying to actually access the pleasure centers in my pelvic floor, then there is none,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's that moderation. It's not too much, it's not too little, it's right in the middle. We want our pelvic floor, our vagina, our uterus, our cervix to be where it's supposed to be in accordance with our own personal body stuff. And so sometimes that requires stretching and release. Sometimes that requires strengthening and toning. Sometimes that requires more mindful presence and being like really present with. One of the powers of fascia is that it really, there's this, it has cells in its structure that's very akin to muscle cells. They're contractile cells. Just in the way that you can choose to say, I'm going to like tighten my bicep, you can actually choose to contract your fascia. And this
Mm.
gives us ultimate freedom. That's kind of what the science is behind what I do, because I noticed that I would go to all these massage therapists and I'd loosen up and then I'd go dance again and all my tensions and my pain and my symptoms would come back. I would feel really good and have pelvic floor release because I had sexual abuse in my past. And then I'd feel pretty good. And then all of a sudden I'd go into a sexual experience and I'd contract up and then I couldn't release. And so what I discovered is that there's actually a way to, while I'm engaged in the activity, I was able to move my fascia and create the releasing while I was participating, not apart from. It's almost like the difference between going in to psychological analysis and then trying to change your behavior without bridging the two,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have to change mind and action. And so fascia gives you this really potent way of, I get to feel and be present in my body. And if I use the communication sensory system, I have really access to both making my pain, if that's what it is, pleasure, and then if not, taking my pleasure and enhancing it,
Yeah.
right? And talking to it.
So there's so much fascia involved in so many different systems.
Yes.
Do you heal or improve or bring it healthy all at once as a system, or do you have to work on each part,
That's oh,
each area separately? Like, is it,
no one has ever asked me that. That's
oh,
really interesting. You know what? I'm going to tell you that I would say there's broad approach and topical, right? Because you do have to go in and open your hips. That is a muscular, but it also involves the viscera of your sexual organs, right? The
yeah,
hip
yeah,
is connected to the viscera. And so, and if you can picture in its netting, the body fascia doesn't say that is a separate part than this. So yes, you need to do that. But for example, stretching your hip also doesn't mean that you're carrying that viscera, motility, it's called, into motion, right? Just because you're opening a joint doesn't mean that the fascia is necessarily having that impulse that's going, that's fluxing and moving. And so the idea is that you have to address the whole system. And when you start understanding how fascia has the impulse, but then it shows an action like a wave, the way it moves through, you want to have both. You don't just go in and try to like open this part. You're like, when I open this, this is how it's going to go. And when you start seeing the body that way, and you might even, if you've done somatic stuff with your clients, they'll say, I'm opening my hip, but I feel it in my right shoulder blade. And so the idea is that the body is telling you those two things are related.
Yeah.
You can like have sex and you'll be like, why do I always want to cry? And I feel like pressure in my throat, because they're related,
Yeah.
because they actually share similar tissues. And so all of a sudden, it's almost like this broadening how you're connected, and you want to deal with both. You don't want to just go into the hip. That's kind of the old school way where you're like, this is a hip problem. This is constantly, I hear people always saying it's a pelvic floor problem. And I'm like, not really.
Right, right.
Deal
That's
with
where
it.
that's where it's sort of showing up or
That's
hitched
right.
up, but it's
Source
part of a
versus
whole system. Yeah.
That's right. Source versus symptom.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what's a fun thing about fascia, is it helps like lead you, almost like unthreading your sweater will lead you to the, source. And it is true that if you can find the source of that contracture, then it will actually deal with your hip without you having to go into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really powerful if you are trying to heal things in your body or gain access to things. A lot of times we use our brain to try to, I can relate it mostly to my own psychological journey, but it's like we overtax the brain and the nervous system trying to be like, what was this? Or where did this trauma come from? Or how am I like caught up here? And why can't I be intimate like this? And where did I learn that? Okay. And we need that, but actually it also reinforces neurological pathways to that story.
Yeah.
And fascia gives you this new way in to be like, I can release this feeling from inside the tissue without having to retax my brain of toxic shame or toxic experience or, puritanical teachings I was given. We don't have to go back into our narrative to
Right.
find freedom. And
Right.
so choose to do that if you want, but it's a nice alternative to be like, I just need to feel this through. I need to release this from my tissues, and then I can actually be free because it's a different way in.
Yeah. So is there, to make this actionable or
Yeah.
practical or illustrate something here, is there something we could all be doing
Yes.
to start to work with fascia in some part, somehow relative to our
Yeah.
sexual pleasure or experience?
That's great. Let's do it this way. I'm going to describe what fascia needs in terms of motion, and then I'm going to apply it to some of the moves that you can do for pelvic floor health and sexual pleasure.
Okay, perfect.
There's 3 actions that fascia loves, and they are that hydraulic system. There's compression, which is like taking a tube, those Chinese finger toys for your listeners. They're like woven tubes that you use to put your fingers in. You push the tube together, the fibers loosen. You pull your fingers apart, they tighten and they become strong. Fascia strengthens as it lengthens. And then there's rotation. Okay. This is akin to hand washing a sweater in a tub. When you dunk the sweater in, the fibers loosen. When you pull it out, the water pulls all of that tension down and starts to wash the tension, and then you wring it out. And that's what cleans it from the debris. Every movement you do needs to have the elements of compression, traction. It's the hydraulic pump and rotation. So in the very beginning of the morning, you need to do this regardless of sexual health, but then we can put it into different shapes to help feed that pressure and that movement and the opening and the stretch into that area. So in the morning, I'm going to describe the exercise to you. You put your toes against your sink and the cabinets at your sink. Grab onto your sink. If you have the space, please do it here. If not, find a railing. And you're going to pull your butt back and traction your body off of the sink. You hold onto the sink and you pull your butt back, and it pulls your whole spine really long.
Oh, okay. So you're sort of stretching away from whatever you're holding on to.
Are you going to videotape this? Let me show you.
Well, I have some video, but this is an audio podcast. So unless
okay.
People that find it on YouTube could see the video.
They can actually. I have one that describes this whole thing. Perfect.
Okay.
So yes, your hands are on the sink, if you can picture that. Your feet are close to the base of your cabinets. And I just want people to pull back like they're hanging off a jungle gym from their sink. And they're feeling their spine angle and their hips are moving away from their grip of their hands. Okay.
Okay.
Bend your knees all the way down to the floor, and it's called a primal squat. This is where it becomes really important to pelvic floor health. We need our spine to be able to lengthen and our knees to come in to be able to pressurize the lower cavity of our torso, to decompress the nerves in our low back, and to open the pelvic floor, both the inlet and the outlet of the pelvis, which will help to set the tensions of your pelvic floor. Then you're going to straighten your legs again and try to keep that openness in your pelvis while you pull back. And then you come up and you push against and kind of do this upper cobra. You lean onto your hands on the sink, lift your chin, and get full traction all the way from sternum to pelvic floor. That's stretching your diaphragm. And the diaphragm tensions are really important to your pelvic floor health and placement of the tensions. Do that again. Do it 4 or 5 times. Then let's focus it a little bit more on the hips so that your hips are starting to open for good sexual pleasure and health. Take your right ankle, put it across your left knee to a number 4 stretch. People do this often in the gym lying on their back where they cross it over and pull it into their chest, but you're going to do it with traction. So you pull back, hanging off the sink, same action, except your leg is crossed, different body shape. Then you drop your hips as low as you can, and you're going to feel this all in your hips. While you're in this shape, see if you can find the movement that I talked about earlier on the podcast where you hold the shape. It's not about just the stretch. The stretch is augmenting the restriction. It's saying, here's where you're tight that is affecting your pelvic floor structures. You want to stay in the tightness and then say, what other movement, what intrinsic movement? And the goal of this is, yes, to open your hips, but it's to find the movement that is around your pelvic floor, your uterus, your bladder, and find how to activate the fascia in that area. Then you take the pressure off. We go back into traction, right? Compression, traction, and then you come up and forward and you arch again. Do that 4 times. Then go on to the left side and do it. My suggestion to people, and these are 2 that they'll remember. If I keep going on and on, they won't remember. So I'm going to stop there. But I want to say this. One of the most important things about any type of tissue health and its relationship to who we are and how we live our lives, the things we want to accomplish, sex or not, is to make this layered into your life. Fascia likes microdosing. It wants to do that stretch I just explained to you once an hour for 30 seconds, once on each side. Fluff the tissue. So think about your fascia kind of like a snow globe. The snow is heavy and sedimentary after an hour, and you have to get it up, shake it out, get the flurry of the snow, and then move on with your day. And so you look around your life and you say, my life is my jungle gym. Where can I hang off of? Where can I grip onto? Where can I, because I also think that it's a really important time to check in with yourself. One of the things that I've discovered in my own work with people on their sexual issues, mostly pelvic floor, because I come from the physical side, is that it is deeply about being connected to self.
Yeah.
And I think that we are always pulled out and away and, excuse me, outside of ourselves. And if we could once an hour just drop in to feel ourselves from the inside, to be inside our inner space and actually experience, what is this discomfort, this stretch, the yawn I need? If you collect sensations like seashells, pretty soon you'll be able to be like, oh, that one belongs over here, and this one I don't need anymore. And you will start to have options. And that's really the definition of healing or of getting, like, let's say you want more pleasure. You need more options. If you don't have the access to your pleasure centers, it's because you don't have sensation there. So we need to add. What better way than to actually connect to your sensory organ that will give that to you?
So you have a video of you demonstrating this. I want to make sure we put that in the show notes. Okay. We'll put that in the show notes.
Actually, I will write my team right now and just make sure that we have that really basic video up there. I'm pretty sure it's there. I have.
Okay. So talk to me. I mean, let everybody know, how do they reach you? How do you work with people? What do you have available?
Yes, I work with people primarily in our online studio. It's called the Vital Life Studio. It's a monthly subscription. There's wonderful videos that go everywhere from kind of fitness, movement to movement therapy and physical, like I call it movement medicine, which is more our approach to physical therapy. And then there's more somatic releases, which is like body work videos that teach you how to really get in. And so that's a really nice way that people can kind of get introduced. I also run a really wonderful 10-week program called the Ageless Body. And you get to work with me directly twice a week online. And there's videos that you get to follow along and be in community with. So that's also, you can find me at gstbody.com. GST Body. I won't even go into where that came from, but
That's
find
fine.
me.
We'll have the link in the show notes too, so
Perfect.
people can
That'd
get
be
you.
great.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much for being on the show.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having me. It's lovely talking with you.